So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the life of the hedgerow. Now, this shot here is on top of, well, you might guess actually, it's on top of Garway Hill, looking towards Peterchurch in the distance. You can just see the spire where I live. Just to sort of point out that obviously Herefordshire, although like everywhere else has grubbed out some hedgerows, it still has quite an extensive mix of hedgerows throughout the county, really. So we're quite lucky in that respect. And I thought I'd just leave this in just to glory in it, really. So what I'll be doing is going through a little bit about the history of hedgerows and some of the misconceptions in that. Some of the key sort of keystone features of hedgerows in terms of the shrubs or small trees you get, and then going on to talk about the associated wildlife you get in hedgerows, and how you would manage a hedgerow as well, you know, ideally, and the conservation of them and how we should look after them in the future. So questions at the end, I guess, and we'll just go through it. So just to point out, here we are. We've got two pictures of one in Normandy, I think you call it bocage, and one in Greece. You can actually see sort of small hedgerow features, and this is obviously a hedgerow feature here. The sort of conception that hedgerows are uniquely British. They're not that old, and they don't really have a life of their own, and they're all planted. So this slide just illustrates the fact that, you know, they are found all over the world. Some have been found in the Alps, and in Texas, in the Peruvian Andes. I think this is Mount Helicon in Greece, and then you've got somewhere in Normandy in France. So they are found all the way throughout the world, really. And as we'll be also seeing, that they actually are quite ancient features. I think the first recorded hedge was in 940 AD. I'm sure there were sort of hedgerows before that. So let's just take you through it. Also, this came up actually. This is really interesting. When I first did this talk for the first time ever, it was on Radio 4, and it was a program about the Great Salt Hedge of India, and it was massively long. It was basically to collect all the taxes that you got off salt. Obviously, salt is a massive money spinner at the time, because you couldn't obviously preserve food. It's very valuable, and obviously still is, but they built this huge hedge in order to collect salt taxes, but they found that, you know, a lot of it was very difficult to maintain. You would imagine that, wouldn't you, really, because you've got this huge hedge and you've got elephants tramping through it. I mean, it was a spiny hedge anyway. I can't remember what the species was. It was a very spiny species that's quite resistant, but even so, people would hack their way through it and everything else. So just another indication that hedges aren't uniquely British. They are found throughout the world, really. Now, this can't go talk about hedgerows without sort of talking about fields, I suppose, in certain respects. In terms of what are hedges? They are boundary features. They are, or sometimes they are actually sort of ghosts of woodlands that have been grubbed out. These features here are ancient reeves on Dartmoor. So I used to live in South Devon, so it's quite unique to me. I kind of would visit these sort of places when I was younger, and you get associated, you know, scrub growing up around these sort of boundary features as well. When they were probably in existence, they're probably left to colonize and be a sort of boundary fence from warring tribes, or to keep cattle in and keep stock in, even to protection from the wind, because one thing that hedgerows do, of course, is really protect you from the wind. So, you know, your soil erosion is going to be less. This is a shot here of a Celtic field system near Spurdrop Down, next to Barbury Castle in Wiltshire, and it's apparently, I mean, if you went there and walked on it, you'd think this is really boring, crikey, but they are quite unique from the air. So that's sort of Celtic times, and then going on to sort of Anglo-Saxon times, people were actually recognizing the worth of the hedge, and it actually was the words for hedge were derived from Anglo-Saxon. I couldn't find any videos of Anglo-Saxon people. It's strange. So I had to make do with this this picture here. So all these words are sort of derivation of hedge, and they mean certainly different things. And I think certain ones relate to different parts of the country, but they all relate to hawthorn, really, hedge or hawthorn, and that's where we get, you know, hedge sparrow from as well. So they saw the importance, and it was recognised at the time they actually were started mapping these things around the Domesday Book kind of time. They started actually kind of recognising it, and the great work by Oliver Rackham. He documents all this. If you can read, I'm sure most people have probably, quite a few people have probably read that book. And yeah, so there was hawthorn, which is the keystone species in a hedge, really. Now, I just want to talk about, obviously, when you talk about hedges, you have field systems like this in the middle. Can you see in the middle here, you've got these very long, sinuous fields. They're kind of like stripped fields where people would cultivate land and live in harmony with it. Well, grab out a meagre existence probably, but you know, it was a way that people could get an income, you know, and have their own little plot of land that they'd farm. Most sort of as agriculture has become more intensified, of course, you know, the fields amalgamate and you have less and less hedgerows, bigger fields, and of course in Herefordshire the fields aren't that big if you, in comparison to what, you know, you go to Cambridgeshire or Lincolnshire, and these long, sometimes quite sigmoidal sort of field systems were related to how the actual land was ploughed, really, because they create the turning circle, and the certain type of plough shaft would dictate you'd have a little wriggle at the end and the bottom and the top. But really, for hedges, they did change in terms of the fact that, of course, the Enclosures Act, which people know, but I'm not going to go into a massive long thing about the Enclosures Act, and unfortunately I couldn't find one from Herefordshire, sorry about that, but so I had to find this one from Northampton. But obviously the Enclosures Act meant that, you know, people were enclosing fields and kicking their serfs off, and then allowing them perhaps to come back as tenant farmers, obviously under worse conditions. So massive load of hedges were planted around that time, from 1750 to 1850. 200,000 miles of hedgerow were planted, predominantly of hawthorn, the sort of common hawthorn, Crataegus monogyna. So it's a massive, like, investment, really, and you know, for 100 years this was going on, and I'll come to the reason why it's kind of unique, really. You can sometimes see you can sometimes see a hedgerow that is almost completely hawthorn. If it's in a kind of isolated place, it might be from this time. Now, if we're talking about, I mentioned earlier about hedgerows being fairly young, but of course we know that they are possibly, you know, millennia old. One guy who did some research on this was Hooper, and he looked at hedgerows in Devon over a certain stretch. I think it's about 330 yards or something like that, and he counted amount of species along that stretch, and found that for every 100 years you got an extra species. So if you had, you know, 1,000-year-old hedge, it was likely to have 10 species in it, and vice versa. So it's a very rough way of doing things. It is a rough guide. Of course, anyone here could probably say, but yes, but Tim, you know, you're not going to have the same species in Scotland as you are in Devon. That's quite correct. You know, you're only going to have about 5 species up in the north of Scotland, and similarly, you know, eastern areas, a comparison to wetter areas in the west, it's all going to differ, and it's all a reflection of local conditions and the way it was managed as well. So Hooper's rule was kind of an interesting one. It gave you a rough idea of how hedgerows are aged. If you were particularly fond, you could also look at bramble as well, because the amount of bramble species in a hedgerow could give you an indication of how old it is. Apparently, a lot of people here would know that there's hundreds of micro species of bramble, Rubus fruticosus. That's why it's called an aggregate, because there's actually micro species within that. They're all clones make so these clonal species just bud off, and they sort of make clones of themselves, and you can. This is why, if you're in a certain area, some brambles taste nicer than each other than other species. They are different bramble species. So if anyone fancies it, they can become a bramble expert. I don't think there's really one in Herefordshire yet. So we're looking for somebody who'll take up the mantle, really. So that'd be good. Now, I just thought to show you, this is my local patch, actually. So it's a fairly standard kind of, it's a bridleway in Peterchurch. Just so you show you the composition, because when you're thinking about hedgerows, they are a amalgam of different sort of layers. And this one is fairly typical. So we've got the main species, hazel, which we'll talk a little bit more about these later on. Hawthorn, the more you look, you've got elder there shooting through. You've got blackthorn, which is a creeper. Parsley, you'll always like to find it along a hedgerow. Red campion there. And what's that one? I can't see what I'm doing there. Dandelion, and we've got, what's that? Oh, my box is gone, isn't it? Yeah. Soft shield fern, nettle, false wood brome, more broadleaf dock, creeping buttercup. The more things you are, ground ivy right at the bottom. Now this is a fairly sort of typical hedgerow. You've got a sort of these big taller plant herbage, and then you've got things right near the trackside which are more resistant to trampling and perhaps more resilient to sort of being treated harshly, whereas these other species here along right next within the hedgerow almost in itself are quite good as competitors. So the cow parsley is quite a good competitor, can outmuscle, and the nettle obviously is quite good at taking over space. Typical hedgerow, we'll see later on that unfortunately not all of them are quite like that. Now I just want to point out that we're looking there at a lovely bluebell woodland which we have in Herefordshire, but they are sort of ghost habitats. So really they're sort of transition habitats between wood and the field or grassland. Between wood and grassland you have these sort of transition habitats, which hedgerows effectively are. They're a sort of transition, these ecotones they're known as, and they're actually quite biodiverse. So when you're talking about hedgerows, you are looking at sort of often thinking about, you get these sort of species that are the ghosts of a grubbed out wood. So you get bluebells in it, or dog's mercury, and you can look at those sort of keystone species that are found in woodlands but are actually still extant in a hedgerow. So let's just talk a little bit about the main species. Now, and this is the one that I've talked about earlier, hawthorn. Now this giant you can see as a figure in the background there, and this is actually a hawthorn, and believe it or not, now this is in Savernake Forest, and it's supposedly one of the biggest in the country, really. So it's absolutely huge. You just couldn't believe it. The actual footprint is probably as big as a small village hall. It's incredible. That's not really how we usually see hawthorn, and I suppose that's the way we should really think about all species, really, or certainly plants. They're sometimes not allowed to go to their full extent, and this is certainly their full extent. So there's a typical hawthorn, sometimes called maythorn, because it flowers in May. It has a peculiar aroma, sometimes, and the old wives' tale, old folk tale is that you should never bring white flowers into the house because they're known as mother dye. I think probably because certain flowers like this, like the hawthorn, they have a real cocktail of chemicals in them, one of which is the same as dead bodies. So you know, they've actually worked, and the same sort of smells you get from dead bodies. I don't know if that's actually true. I've never smelt a human body. I've smelt enough animal bodies from picking them up off the road and things. But they are a weird smell. If anyone's ever smelt hawthorn, it's a peculiar sort of scent. Now, those are obviously the haws when they're very good for birds, of course, to feeding in the winter. Also very packed full of vitamin C. They're very, very good for you. And when they're young, when the leaves are young, people used to pick them as they're called bread and cheese, and people used to eat them. I mean, now you can eat them. And, they're supposed to be quite good for your heart. I don't know if anyone has ever tried that, but if you ever try it, when I've eaten them, they just taste like leaves, and they're not the nice. I suppose with all these things, you've got to pick them when they're really fresh. So if anyone's ever tried a beech leaf when it's just come out, it's quite nice. It's a bit like a grape skin. But hawthorn, there's lots of sort of myths around them, of course. Joseph Arimathea brought one back from the Holy Land and planted it on Glastonbury Tor, and it flowers in midwinter, but it's a different species, so it's then could take us more than a guy apparently, so that's not surprising. It's obviously got the thorns which protect against wild beasts and people getting in. It's very good for birds. Now, as well as talking about the actual plant itself, I just wanted to point out some of the real associated wildlife you get with particular species. And this is one of them, hawthorn shieldbug. For anyone who, this is a true bug, so the Hemiptera, which have a piercing rostrum. Now, the piercing rostrum, you can't see it there, but it's got this big, long, spiky sort of mouth part, which it injects into plants and sucks out the sap. So that's how you know it's a bug, a true bug. And shield bugs are one of the biggest members of that group. So they're very large, very colourful, and hawthorn bug. Here you can see why it's called the Latin. Obviously, it's not really Latin, is it? It's pseudo-Latin, but is useful sometimes because you've got the second part is hemorrhagale, hemorrhage. It's blood red, whatever. It's got these, and on the here the scutellum here, you've got scutellum. You've got the red coloration of it. So it's sort of thing you associate with hawthorn. Blackthorn is another real keystone species you get in hedgerows. If the clever people amongst you will be able to say that, yeah, it's because it flowers earlier, so you can actually spot it from your car and go, well, I think that's blackthorn over there. It's April, not May, and you can say it's blackthorn. You can see it's got far larger spines than hawthorn has, and if it goes through your boot, as any gardener will probably tell you, it will go through your boot like nobody's business. And it has a sort of kind of a darker bark as well. I think the traditional way of using blackthorn is as the Irish shillelaghs, the sort of clubs. So apparently that's what you should do with it if you ever get one. It also make nice walking sticks as well. So prunus is really, it's almost called quick thorn because it'll take quite quickly, and it also suckers quite rapidly, so it will creep out into your field and take over the space within it if you're not careful. And now this thing associated with blackthorn, the brown hair streak. Now, as I was saying to a group doing the Harvest Mouse course last Sunday, which seemed, we were rummaging around trying to find nests made out of grass in cold conditions. The other ridiculous thing to do in winter time is look for this tiny little sea urchin egg of the brown hair streak on blackthorn. It has to be the right sort of height of blackthorn. It can't be too big, can't be too small. Otherwise, the caterpillars will either not have enough food to eat, or the food they do have to eat is going to be too coarse and too thick really, I think. So they lay these eggs right in the crook of the branch where the branches come off, and then they hatch out later on the year. But you can see them in the winter, so that it's a good way of measuring brown hair streak populations for those. I mean, I know I'm a member of Butterfly Conservation, but I'm a big moth fan as well. And here's one moth you can see on hawthorn, the magpie, which is sometimes associated with heather as well, the moorland, and it's sort of on decline. As anyone knows, you know, the larger moths are on decline, have declined massively since sort of 1970, 80, and obviously there's lots of reasons for that. Now, the other species, hazel, which is a real common species in hedgerow, Corylus avellana. So it obviously produces nuts in the autumn, and great food source for lots of things, as we'll see. There's its catkins, which you'll see up and close. And of course, if anyone knows, you coppice hazel quite nicely, as you can coppice, you know, the other things as well. But they produce these shoots that are very, very straight. And in the past, we use it for making charcoal and lots of other uses, really making hurdles. And they're quite bendy, so they can be twisted into shape. But this is, see, quite an ancient coppice stool that's been let go. And you can see it's really thick now. You wouldn't use that for your hazel hurdle necessarily. You'd find another use for it, firewood, I think. But this is just from my local patch in Peachchurch. So all these sort of slides, and most of them are from the local area. Have a look for this though. It does occur outside spring. It's called the hazel spring cup fungus. It's very, very small, and he produces these little weird little sort of I don't know what you call them, coffee bean shaped, aren't they? Really, they're amazing little things, and they just break down hazel slowly. That's sort of on its way out, really, and that's a sort of common thing to find if anyone has a look. I mean, if anyone's into firewood and just chopping up, I hope and find them when I'm just chopping up wood, really. But that's the hazel cup fungus. Another weird one is hazel glue crust fungus. So what happens, obviously, with these straight holes that grow up from the coppice stool, they tend to sort of, well, they'll rub against each other, and that allows this fungus will actually glue them together and break them down. So Hamilkiti corrugata does that, and it's not. People are amazed when they see it. Think, oh, crikey! I mean, in this picture, you've actually got another sort of dead bit of hazel there with it looks like hairy curtain crust. Another good name, isn't it? Hairy curtain crust and hazel glue crust, all good names. Talking about fungi, it's quite often associated with hazel, but not exclusively, where you get old decaying hazel on the forest woodland floor. Scarlet elf cup. There's actually two species of this now, so you have to look out from under a microscope to be sure. But these are really distinctive, aren't they? I mean, they're on the floor, they're red, and it's what the elves drink from, obviously. In the past, in North America, it was thought they were good for childbirth, after childbirth, but they are edible apparently. Of course, I wouldn't advocate that on this talk necessarily, but because you have to be quite careful. Go with an expert. You've got to be 100% know what you're doing. But this one, it's not, doesn't really look like much else really. And I can't forget the nut tree tussock moth. So after look at him, he's got his lovely Ugg boot kind of legs. He look fluffy. It's quite a beautiful little thing, and very common, associated with hazel. And of course, if you don't have that mix of trees in your hedgerow, you don't get the mix of diversity of invertebrates, and then you don't get the mix of birds and then top predators. So you've got to think about it in the round, and obviously, if you're planting a hedge, plant as many species as you can in it. This one as well is a lovely little weevil. I do like a nice weevil. Who doesn't? But this is one of the biggest ones, and you can see it's got this very long rostrum, its little nose, if you like, and that helps it apparently deposit its eggs within a hazelnut. And there's the one that does it on acorns as well, a different species, but they're lovely little things. If you ever look out for them. This one as well, if you're talking about plants, is this thing that you only really see sort of really early springtime. It's completely parasitic on the sort of hazel and the mycorrhizal fungi that are associated with hazel. So it comes up in springtime. It's called toothwort, and I suppose because they look like tooths, don't they, these flowers? You can see there that they've got no green tissue at all. There's no leaves, there's no green on the stem or anything like that. They don't need it. They feed purely parasitically on the hazel and the fungi underneath the soil. Now, elder, one of my favourites really, because partly because it's such a useful plant, isn't it? You've got the berries, which you can make lots of different things like sloe gin. Oh no, hang on, that's I've done that before actually. That's for sloe gin, of course, is from blackthorn. I've done that before on a tree video, and realised my stupid error, which is not as bad of me, because I'm actually the teaching trees officer for Herefordshire, so I should know better. But yeah, sorry, elderberry wine I'm thinking of. I should have some now. And it's also got the leaves, which I mean, I always use the leaves to sort of use as a sort of insecticide. So I rub my face and sort of back of my ears with it from out on a hot July day, and that tends to keep the flies away. Of course, you're green, of course, so that is the downside of it, I guess. This thing is associated with elder, the elder pearl. I often find it in my bathroom. Strangely, it just seems to come in bathrooms, but it is associated with elder, and elder's obviously a common thing. And wherever you've got elder, you've got other things like fungi breaking down old elder. I put onto sambucai. I think it does grow on other hosts as well, actually. It's what you call a racupinate fungus. It's a cortizoid, so it's just like a very thin layer, like a lichen, but it is a fungi that's breaking that elder branch down. But it does look very impressive where you point it out to somebody. They thought it was just like, somebody slops some paint on, then you can go, oh, actually it's Hyphodontia sambucai. So you look very clever. As well, you probably won't look quite so clever, but you'll know this. You might have seen this before. It's called jelly ear, and it used to be called Jew's ear. So called because Judas Iscariot hung himself on an elder tree. Now, before he did this, the elder was a mighty tree, and because Judas Iscariot chose the elder tree to hang himself on, God smote the elder tree, made the lowly shrub it is now. That's what somebody told me anyway. That's the myth about it. Obviously, it's been changed, but you can see the Latin name hasn't been changed. It's still Judea on the end. You can eat this thing. It's quite nice in a laxa, the sort of a broth, a sort of Asian broth or something like that. If you just chuck them in a pan, they tend to spit. But I'm sure there's somebody out there who's tried it. And of course, you do get sort of tree, standard trees within hedgerows that are left sometimes or grow up naturally, like field maple. There's a shot of its flowers which you don't often see. I think tree flowers are often neglected, and people just don't look at them really. Partly because they're up high, and partly because they sort of flower quite early, I guess. And that's this typical leaf shape. It is a maple, and you've got there ghoul mite. Now, a lot of these ghouls are specific to particular hosts, which is quite useful. Just for people who don't know what ghoul is, it's something that induces a chemical reaction within the tree or plant. It's either fungal, it's either bacterial or viral, and sometimes in this case mites, and you also get wasps that do it as well. So they inject something in there and induces a cancerous like growth, within which in this case the mite develops. You get them in quite large numbers. Doesn't usually affect the tree unduly. I guess if you had loads and loads of it, like you do with some ghouls, it might do. And oak is a brilliant one. Is a good example. You've seen loads of ghouls on oak, but they're on lots and lots of trees. So I would recommend people, if they know what the tree is, you can often say what the ghoul is as well. So you're not just recording one thing, you're recording a couple, which is fantastic. I can't leave hedgerows really without talking about holly. So holly is a very sort of special tree, really, in terms of its mythology. It has the power over animals if you use it. That's why you would make a whip out of holly. And you'd obviously, a lot of people even now leave holly in certain places because they're afraid to take it down. You have to ask the holly tree if you can cut a branch of it for Christmas. How you'll know the answer, I don't know, but that's what you're supposed to do. And you should always leave it in hedgerows because, of course, witches run along the tops of hedgerows, so it will spike their feet. This is obviously, you can see the leaves, we all know they're very, very shiny, very glossy. They're a great protection mechanism for especially large herbivores, I guess, but certainly in some regions near me in Oldcombe Valley, you have these hollins where they're kept in the middle of fields to feed stock in winter, and they're very nutritious. You wouldn't think cattle or sheep would feed them, but they do, and they're very good for them. So there's the usual leaf shape. It's very, very plastic. So in other areas of the tree, you get these without any prickles on at all, and they're very, very unique in that respect. Now, if you ever look at sort of the leaf litter underneath holly, you will find rotten holly leaves, and you think, what could be breaking it down? It's very, very shiny and waxy. It's amazing, really. And this is one of the things that the fungi species that does it. It's called the holly parachute, and it's one of the few that has hairs on its cap, which is really strange. It has these little red hairs all over its cap. I mean, these are tiny. You can see from this picture here on the right that these has this very, very long stipe, and a very small, it's quite a small cap even so, and it's got these little red hairs on. Lovely thing. Spindle, you often get as well. This is the fruit. It's absolutely lovely, isn't it? Orange and pink. It's called spindle because these long straight branches are very good for making drop spindles. And for any wool enthusiasts out there, will know that the drop spindle is a way to make wool, make yarns of wool, to spin it into something usable from the raw material. So I guess back in the day, and even now, spinning wheels are very, very expensive bits of kit, and you could actually make a spindle for next to no money. And it's a real skill, and people in the Andes and the Peruvian Andes, the Inca people would still use them now, and with baby on the back, and they're still making wool from a spindle. So I'm kind of very interested in the way in which we engage with different species and nature generally enriches our life, really. Now, I just wanted to break this down for you. We've been talking about some of the sort of key species, and some people have actually done work on this. So again, there's a different guy in Devon. He looked at a single Devon hedge, and he was kind of fortunate in that he had a very nice hedge. But even so, he actually went about measuring all the things that were in it over a period of time. So he actually found that, this is from British Wildlife, by the way. This is an article in there which I heartily recommend anyone to read about. If you just Google British Wildlife, it used to be British Wildlife Publishing, but they've been taken over now. But the quality is still the same. It's amazing. So 2,070 species have been recorded from this hedge, which is incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's only it's not that along a hedge. It's not massive, but that's a huge number of species for what is, it's not a national nature reserve or anything. But it really does depend on a few factors. So where it sits within a landscape, is it next to other high areas of diversity or woodland? Is the actual structure of the hedge, is it just thin, or is it being cut back, whatever? Is it allowed to develop? And is it perhaps, has it got a little bit of a ditch in it in one side of it, which always helps the plant diversity? You do get these green lane effects where it's warmer in certain areas of the the hedge, and it's obviously, I was talked about shelter earlier on. So you get different sort of niches within the hedge itself, and also good management as well. And this hedge was managed very, very well, I think. So it does help. It doesn't just be flailed to death every year and become a little bit gappy and that sort of thing. It's a nice hedge. But even so, it does show you, if you just start looking, you can find a lot of different things. I'm just going to briefly run through some of the other sort of species you can find in the hedgerow. Some of the climbers, like dog rose, you can kind of climbing through it. And on dog rose, you do get this thing called Robin's pincushion. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It's a fluffy red ball, and this is a parasitic wasp that induces these growths. So at the end of these little fibrous things, there is a developing wasp larvae, and you also get things that parasitize the wasp larvae as well. So people have done investigations on this and actually found that there's actually a number of different species you can get. You don't just get like the one wasp larvae. You might get the parasite on that. So it's incredible things. So you look out for them. They do grow on cultivated roses as well. Honeysuckle you can get. Honeysuckle's a great nectar source for a lot of different invertebrates. And ivy, obviously throughout the base edge and probably growing up through it. Again, it's quite plastic in its morphology. You get, these leaves that are all different types of shapes. There is a couple of, 2 or 3 species of ivy as well, and it depends on looking at the hairs. But for us, let's just think about ivy as heterohelix. Traveller's joy as well. That's another climber and straggler through the hedge. Looks lovely, of course, in autumn. And now let's just consider some of the larger herbs. And this is one of those sort of the key ones, I guess, is cow parsley. And it grows up to quite a height and has these umbels, so these white umbels, which are basically sort of landing pads for pollinating insects. And I'm not going to say bees necessarily, but people will think about bees as being pollinators, but it's all the other things as well, hoverflies and thrips and wasps and all sorts of things. So they're great pollinators, and just be careful. They're not real parsley. You can't use them in your fish dishes or whatever. If you ever look at one though, they're really good for a lot of invertebrates. So have a close look at cow parsley. That's things like spotted longhorn. You'll pretty much always find it, or other tall herbs. You'll get this thing. The longhorn beetle are a good family to start with because they're so brightly coloured. Usually they're fairly large and they're fairly charismatic things. So they're a good sort of starter, a gateway drug into Coleoptera. I like to think of them. This is one of the commonest ones. You'll almost always find it if you're out for a ramble in summer. You can almost guarantee you'll find it. Then this one, I just mentioned hoverflies earlier. This is a marmalade hoverfly. Gunlana is a teasel, or is a scabious. I think it's scabious. I think one of the commonest hoverflies, and there are 280 species of them. So they're distinctive in that they have the Venus spuria, this false vein running through their wing. They're often mimics of bees and wasps. Have these very stripy patterns, and there's a lot of them, and they're very, very important pollinators. Other things then, hogweed. Haven't shown the flower there, but I've just shown you the young shoots, which you can apparently eat. I've never tried it. Well, I did once, I think. Sort of often called poor man's asparagus, but this family is very, very dangerous because you haven't just got wild carrot, which is obviously what we derived the actual cultivated carrot from, and grows on roadsides, this sort of thing. You've got this thing which is hemlock water dropwort, which is the most poisonous plant in the UK. So it can be found in hedgerows. You've got a sort of wetter area. It likes wetter areas near sort of rivers or ditches and that sort of thing. And it's incredibly poisonous. So plants then got garlic mustard, which is one of the cruciferous plants, and that's quite nice to eat. There's it's a garlicky taste, as well as obviously ramsons. Everyone familiar with that. And if you came across that, you'd know it was kind of this hedge was a sort of ghost of a grubbed out wood, and it's the edge of it that's just been left. And you can use that obviously for pesto and lots of other things. I love cooking with it. It's a great thing. There's actually a very rare, well, not rare, but really distinctive hoverfly, the Ramson's hoverfly, that is all it's a bit grey and associated with Ramsons. Burdock, we get dandelion burdock, and obviously the seed heads are where we got the idea for Velcro. Lords and ladies can be growing in a hedgerow as well. I mean, the Victorians apparently were, they used to cover them up in their gardens, because not only did they look like a vulva, they looked like a penis at the same time, but I think that's really spurious. I don't think the Victorians were that prurient about them. But clearly they are very poisonous though, so you shouldn't eat any part of them apparently. I haven't tried that one. Now, this is a sort of introduced plant. It's not native to the UK, rosebeard willow, but you'll see it, growing through hedgerows. Provides a bit of colour, and there are, of course, invasive species that aren't from this country. They're non-natives, but aren't any real sort of problem to us. There's loads and loads of them, but they're not all Japanese knotweed. Lovely plant. Hoary willow herb, another one. I just thought I'd show you the seed capsules as they split apart. They look lovely. That's hoary willow herb. You can see why it's called hoary. It's hirsutum. There we are. Foxglove. Foxglove is a really distinctive plant, isn't it? I'm sure everyone would know it, and a lot of bumblebees use them. It's good for your heart in small quantities, but if you exceed your dose, it will give you a heart attack. Now this thing of meadowsweet, obviously most people will probably recognise meadowsweet. It has these big fluffy flowers. They're not in the Apiaceae, the umbelliferous plants, but they've actually got high amounts of salicylic acid in it, which is what's in willow. It's where we derive aspirin. So it actually, I think it has more salicylic acid than willow. So it's good for your headache. So I have actually made teas with this stuff: meadowsweet, ground ivy, a nice herbal tea. Other plants like this, like white dead nettle, you can find throughout the hedgerow. Red campion. Silene is derived from Silenus. I think he's a god of drunkenness, and they look a bit drunk when they were swaying around the wind. I guess they do have I think they have quite a big nectary. So, and sometimes bees and wasps will come in at the side of the flower and pierce them rather than going in from the front. Germander speedwell, talking about very low growing things now. And Germander speedwell, we can tell it's actually got hairs on either side in lines along the stem. There's other speedwells are available. Now Douglas Mercury you can find, again, it's probably it's an ancient indicator species of woodland, so it's probably indicative of that, and it's quite poisonous. The word dogs is obviously a derogatory term, as in it's only fit for the dogs, rather than there is an annual mercury as well. So you've got that. There's also greater plantain as well, which is perhaps the edge of the hedge. You've got areas that are trampled more, and this is a great plant really, because I constantly try and tell people about it because it's very, very good. If you crunch it up, and it's good astringent, it's good. So you've got stung and that sort of thing, much better than dock, which is more of a placebo. Of course, we all know that the placebo effect is an effect, is a powerful one, but they're very resistant to trampling, and the North American Indians referred to them as white man's foot, because as the settlers went out on the plains, this thing would be always found in the cart tracks, very resistant to trampling, so it would find a spot, find a home. And of course, obviously these things are known as weeds in most people's gardens, I guess. But you get broadleaf dock, and you got, there's loads of species associated with dock, like the dock beetle, Castrovicia viridula, which I'm sure people have seen. And I'll just briefly mention mosses and liverworts, because they're often sort of neglected, really, the mosses and liverworts. People don't realise their importance. They are incredibly important as pioneers in a new habitat, in a ruderal habitat where you've got nothing. They are the first ones to come in and establish a thin soil from which plants will then establish and then go on to be your climax community. Well, there is no such thing, but in this case, you've got foxtail feather moss, very, very common, quite a big one. And now the important thing about mosses, of course, is that they're hydrophilic, so they will absorb water really quickly, and then it will be released slowly. So where you've got moss, of course, if you have heavy rainfall, you won't get as much flooding, and they're important in that. They don't realise the amount of moss that will hold water and store it and just release it slowly, rather than a soil with nothing on it. The water will cascade down and flood your village. So I'm really big in mosses up, aren't I, here? But I won't do a whole talk on mosses. But this one is quite a nice, lovely little thing, Theridium tamaracinum. You should technically look at the end leaf to see if there's another Theridium, but there are other Theridiums are available. But this is one of the most sort of statuesque, kind of very distinctive, like stiff-looking thing. Very, very common. Now, I should just mention all the associated fauna as well. We've done flora quite extensively. The crickets are quite common, especially dark bush crickets, and oak bush crickets, and speckled crickets. Quite common in hedgerows, really. You can see the crickets hold their antennae straight out in front of them, and the grasshoppers tend to put their antennae along their back. Usually, crickets are usually a bit more stockier as well, but these are only sort of very arbitrary rules, aren't they? Sometimes, whenever I've seen some grasshoppers, they've had their antennae forward. I obviously haven't read the textbook, but this is a common one, dark bush cricket. And you can just imagine that the amount of beetle life, much coleoptera life, is immense, really, in hedgerows. They occupy a large part of the biodiversity. As somebody once said, that God must be inordinately fond of beetles, because they constitute a large part of identified species in the world. It's only because we haven't identified all the bacteria and viruses yet, I guess. But this is one of them. It's carabid beetles. The ground beetles are a big family, and they're active predators, long legs, very fast runners. They hunt their prey actively, and this is one of the first ones I start to identify the common heart shield, Brevicolis. Yes, that's the Brevicolis. I'm skewing myself with my little box there. It's a very common one, but yeah, you have to have a key to do these things. Now, spiders, sorry for anyone who's arachnophobic, but you do get a lot of spiders within the hedgerow. It provides a lot of niche for certainly some of the orb weavers. They can string their webs between different branches, and Arenaeus diadematus does just that. It's one you often see. It's got this cross on the back, and they're quite big. And if you're a spider fan, you love them, and if you're not, you won't. Yes. Now, mollusks. So I'm quite a big snail fan as well. Sorry for the out of focus picture slide here. No, the brown lip snail is amazing. It's actually the biggest of our snails natively. The garden snail and the Roman snail are introduced. This thing shows amazing morphological variation. So you get these stripes, different width of stripes, you get different colors, and they're doing that in response to where they are and where they're in their environment. If they can be picked out easier in different habitats by thrushes and things, they won't survive, and the ones left will be the ones that will evade capture by thrushes and not be seen as much. So if anyone's seen my museum, I've got a little collection of them that shows the variation of these things. They're amazing, kind of citizen science project. Cock snail, you can find this in hedgerows as well. It's a very kind of distinctive patterned shell, I think. They're kind of quite a big snail as snails go, but I consider 15 millimeters quite big for a snail. So yeah, you do get some very small ones. It's a lovely little thing. Now I can't really sort of go without talking about hazel dormouse, because of course they're associated with hazel apparently. Well, they do. I mean, yes, they do. They are associated with hazel, but we know now that they're associated with lots of different habitats. Sort of fen woodlands, tops of trees, sand dunes. There's lots of places you can find them really. But they do need food source from hazel and a lot of other plants, a wide variety of plants really, so it can sustain them throughout the year. So they need sunlight, they need things fruiting, these things in flower to fruit all the way through the year, so they can hibernate, they can build up reserves. You can see this one on the right hand side, that was a male who was about 32 grams I think, and he was so fat we barely got back into the dormouse box. His little bum was wriggling through and he could barely get it through. I felt like just shoving him in but he was, and this one on the left, I could just, he was still asleep and hear him snoring. Very nice things, but hedgerows are quite important for dormouse, and obviously for connectivity for species to, all species, not just dormouse, to connect to other populations and stop the habitat being so fragmented. You can actually increase your gene pool, and you can discover different areas by using that little bridge, a little safety bridge, by going through the hedge. And rabbits, obviously rabbits sometimes destroy hedgerows, occasionally they burrow into them so much, but there's research recently, there's a massive decline in rabbits, and people are quite worried that their grazing pressure in certain habitats isn't as great. So it's a bit of a worry, even though they're a non-native species, which is odd, isn't it? But they can be found within hedgerows. If there's a thick hedgerow and they've got enough of, it's going to be quite sort of secluded with lots of vegetation. Hedgehogs as well, obviously feeding, I guess, on the slugs and snails, which we've mentioned previously, and the massive decline with them in the last 40 years or so. Fortunately, in Peterchurch, my area, there seems to be a very good population, and Herefordshire perhaps as a whole is pretty good, but it's not like that in the rest of the UK really. Now you get a lot of different rodents, and of course you've got a lot of rodents, you'll also get some of the top predators like your sparrowhawks and your owls and things. Now this is just a wood mouse. I've got a little video to show you here. This is from when we did some trapping, live mammal trapping with Longworth traps. Oh, hang on. Can I go back? I might be able to. Yes. Let's see if it works. Here we are. They're like little kangaroos, these things. I mean, that's why you need a long bag, because they'll just jump out of them. They're amazing. You can see how massive their eyes are. Perfectly adapted for low light conditions. Wonderful little things. Now I should mention I'm not really a bird person. Oh, I do love birds, but I just don't record them very much. I'm not interested in recording because there's so many other people doing it, and I can go out and record different things, the smaller things. But hedge sparrows, you obviously be very associated with hedgerows, which kind of look like a drab bird. But, as anyone's ever seen the footage of them, the males will mate with the female, then another male will come along and peck the sperm packet out of their cloacas, and then mate with them themselves. So that there is footage. The David Attenborough has done it, I'm sure, hundreds of times. I can't remember which program, but so it's all going on in the hedgerow, the hedge sparrows. And for birds, they did a project on looking at what birds preferred And lo and behold, it was not that surprising, I guess. A thick hedgerow with lots of species in it is the best, really, for most of the birds. There are other birds that are like less developed hedgerows, possibly. So I think some of the sort of the more farmland birds, such as yellowhammer, and having a hedgerow at all is really important for farmland birds. Now, I just wanted to give you a couple of facts about the sort of history of hedgerows in the UK. This is the approximate. Obviously, I don't know how they worked this out. There's 1 million kilometres in the 1950s, and go forward, 57 years, and it's been halved. It's been grubbed out. I mean, there was barely any movement, I think, from 1850 to 1950. I think the numbers stayed relatively stable, I think. But it was after the war, I guess, because we felt, the UK felt that it was, very vulnerable to not being self-sustaining and had to grow more food. Is a big drive, I guess, wasn't it, in the Second World War, to grow our own and that sort of thing. So we weren't so dependent on food sources from elsewhere. So bigger fields, less hedgerows. It was all mechanized, and but it was a bit of a worry. In 1997, regulations were passed, so there is certain prohibitions about removing them and that sort of thing. How successful that's been, I don't know. But this is what I recently bought. I say recently, 3 years ago. Me and my partner bought this a plot of land, and that is a hedge in there. Honestly, it's a lot of bramble, a lot of thistle and nettle. And I thought, well, we've got to do something about this. We've got to sort of try and lay it traditionally, which is the best way really to sort of treat your hedge. It extends its life. So within there, we did discover that it had been laid previously. You can see that when you lay a hedge, you basically cut one of the stems until it's nearly through, and then bend it over, and then make it all fancy with uprights and little twisty bits. And you can see it has been laid in the past, and it's just been let go a little bit. So we decided to try and do it. So a couple of my friends, we made our little laid hedge and a little stretch. You have little stakes there, and there's all sorts of different methods you can do that according to region. I'm not overly concerned about. I think it was the Midlands style. I can't remember, but there's it. Looking very nice in winter. That's in Peterchurch. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of hedges are just flailed at the top. You can see this one on the left-hand side has been just flailed. Now, I don't really blame any landowner for flailing the hedge. How on earth is anyone to, you've got to keep it off the roadside. You've got to keep it under control. So it is a bit of an issue. No one can be expected to go out with a bullock and lay a hedge on all their land. But you can, of course, perhaps just cut one side of 1 year and leave the fruits and stuff on for the birds, and then go back the next year and do the other side. So that is one method. You can see on the right hand side though, on this path, this has just been let go. It's just it's turned to a linear wood, if you like. So it's not really a hedge anymore, I guess. You can see this is a sort of more traditional hedge. You've got this standard oak in the middle there. So you can see a better shot there. It's just a hedge has just been let go, and it's now just a line of trees. So it's not quite the same. You can't really call it can you call it a hedge? It's difficult. It's interesting. So the trouble is with flailing hedges is you do get a real thickening at the top, where it just grows up from that point, year after year, because they do seem to, not suffer too much damage from being flailed. But the trouble is, of course, that eventually you're going to get gaps in here, like you have here, and then you haven't got you resorting to the fence line. And you've got massive gaps, and there's not really much of a hedge at all. That's the issue. Or this could happen to it. This happened about a few years ago. You get a car through it. So there's my car there, and people in PHH going, "Oh, I saw your car in the hedge." that gap though quickly grew up. It was amazing. It was a terrible car. If anyone's had a Ford Kaye, they're terrible cars anyway. So I wasn't that fussed. There we are. I thought I'd just give you a brief outline of some of the things that we do as a company. So we do a lot of environmental education work. I've got a nomadic museum and natural history to roll around, which people might have seen. We do school groups and sort of other community group sessions on wildlife. We do traditional craft workshops at festivals and other places. And then do talks like St. Peter's Church, that one down the bottom right. But recently we have been in receipt of a pot of money from the Heritage Lodge. I should have put their logo. Oh my God, they're going to kill. Sorry, Heritage logo. They'll probably take it all off me now. They have a receipt of £100,000 basically for a project that's trying to get people recording, to get more people from all walks of life to record wildlife, whether or not it's just your chaffinch in your garden, which is equally as important as, a rare false scorpion. It's really trying to get people to, enthusiasm about going outside, and it's a good way of getting healthy, getting outside the house, getting some fresh air. So it's a joint project between myself and the Hereford Biological Record Centre. So they've now got a website, which I'll show you in a minute, and this logo. And recently we've ran a fungo course, and you can see there on the left hand side the county recorder Jo Waitman, who is amazing. She's forgotten more than I'll ever know. And on last Sunday we did a harvest mouse survey course. So if I can just how do you do this? I don't know. Let's just stop this share, and then I can try and find the other bit. I'll just show you briefly the oh God, what's going on? Hang on. I'll show you the website. There we are. I was minimized myself. There we are. There we go. So I'll just show you briefly the website of the record centre. So they've got a new website. So this is the home page. I stuck with the dragonfly because it was the old logo, and Peter Garner would like me for showing dragonflies, I'm sure. So on there you can join the mailing list to find out what's going on. If you're new to recording, don't know what to do, you can visit this page here. Hidden Herefordshire is basically it's going to be a landing page for that as well. So I'll take you there. It's got a record of the month. Last month was Dogs Vomit Slime Mold. I haven't changed it yet. You can go to, there's lots of events, news, and you click on the about. If you go to any of these pages, so click on events, it brings up the last. That one should drop off actually, Harvest Mice one, but we've got a Briarfight walk this Friday, which people can join in on, and the next one is Introduction to Lichens. So you can see on there's a huge number of courses which must appeal to somebody, and they're getting booked up even now. So it's well worth having a look on there. It's also got a page on Hidden Herefordshire, so we're encouraging people to survey in their garden. So you can pick up all the resources there. You've got a survey form and common garden bugs. And just email me, and I can actually, if you've got a group of people who want to go out recording and want some help, give me a call and I can do that free of charge. I can work with any sort of community group at all. And then we've got resources as well. So there's lots and lots of resources there. Mammals, tree flies. It takes you to external links, but you've also got a couple of homemade ones as ID resources there as well. So it's a really good good place. And I should also mention, if you're not on social media, which some of you perhaps aren't, we have got an Instagram, Facebook and Twitter account. I don't use them personally, but it's very good to see what's going on from a social perspective. You can, it's a really good resource really. So there we go. And if anyone wants to get involved, just give me a ring, give me a call.